As a society, we are obsessed with failure. Everyone knows what it feels like, and most of us hate it. We spend our time trying to get better habits to avoid it. We sit up one night writing a list of all the things we want to accomplish. We want to wake up early. We want to go for a run. We want to eat a healthy breakfast. We want to clean up. We lie awake one night and we are unhappy with ourselves. We think, I am a failure. But we forgot one thing: to embrace this failure. So many people see this ideal image of themselves, waking up at 6 a.m, having a cold shower, going to the gym, always eating healthy food, never wasting any time. And while it is good to have these ambitions, it is impossible to wake up one morning and have all of these habits implemented, as if your whole character has shifted overnight. The only way to improve is if we better understand failure, why we are so afraid of it, and how we can approach it in a different, more positive way. In this video, I provide a blueprint for breaking free of the pressure that you put on yourself, helping you live a happier, more fulfilled life. But where did this obsession with failure come from? We aren't born afraid of failing. Imagine a baby as afraid of failing as adults are. No one would know how to walk, how to talk, or how to do anything. Our fear of failure stems from our childhood. Psychology suggests that a parent's fear of failure is a strong predictor of a child's fear of failure. In other words, our fear of failure is passed down to us from our parents. Thanks, guys. To break this down further, a parent with a high fear of failure is more likely to withdraw love from their child when they make a mistake or fail at something. Over time, this would lead to the child fearing failure as they seek to avoid this withdrawal of love. They then define failure as something that is unacceptable and negatively impacts their self-worth. But failure is not something we can actually feel. It's not an emotion. The emotion that follows failure is shame. Shame wants us to retreat and hide in places that no one else can see. And the more you fear failure, the higher the shame you feel when expectations are not met. And the more shame you have, the more likely you are to fall back in the same habits that made you feel like a failure in the first place. It is the fear of failure that makes failure a reality. Both success and failure are human-made concepts. They are relative. Failure for one person is success for another. We often feel like a failure because we see others succeed. And this comes down to how we compare ourselves to those around us. This idea was developed into a theory by this guy, Leon Festinger. In his theory, you have people you think are better than you, an upward comparison, or people you think are worse than you, a downward comparison. And these are on a scale from negative opinion to positive opinion. On the negative side, let's say you're comparing yourself to someone you think is better than you, you'll feel jealous towards them. This is when you hear about someone you went to school with and they have a successful job. Even if you don't want that job, you still feel a little bit jealous towards them, or maybe a little bit of shame towards you. And this just adds unnecessary pressure on yourself. And if you compare yourself to someone you think is worse than you, you'll think, oh, they're just lazy, they didn't work hard enough, they don't deserve it. I know this sounds very cynical, but I'm sure you've had a similar feeling in the past. I know I certainly have. And on the positive side, if you look up to someone you think is better than you, you'll feel motivated. My friend got an A on his test last week. I need to work harder next time. And if you're comparing yourself to someone you think is worse than you, then you'll feel grateful for your situation. For me, this could be a lot worse. Now, where do you put yourself on this scale? This theory was developed in the 50s. Back then, we had hardly anyone to compare ourselves to. In the modern age, we can now compare ourselves to almost anyone on the planet without even leaving the home. It is important when you do compare yourself to someone, compare yourself to someone that is worthy of this comparison. Are your role models people that suit your values and your ambitions? The question is not how can we get rid of all comparisons, it's more how can we spend less time here and more time here where we feel motivated and grateful. To do this, we need to rethink who we look up to and how we perceive failure. There once was a Chinese farmer whose horse had run away. That evening, all of his neighbours came over to commiserate. They said, "We are so sorry to hear about your horse. This is most unfortunate." The farmer said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back bringing 7 wild horses with it. And in the evening, everyone came back over and said, "Oh, isn't that lucky? What a great turn of events. Now you have 8 horses." The farmer said, "Maybe." The following day, his son tried to ride one of the horses. He was thrown off and broke his leg. The neighbours then said, "Oh dear, that's too bad." The farmer responded, Maybe. The next day, the conscription officers came over to conscribe people into the army. They rejected his son because he had a broken leg. Again, the neighbours came round and they said, "Oh, isn't that great?" The farmer replied, "Maybe." The moral of this story is that we never truly understand whether something is good or bad until it plays out. There are many times for the farmer and the son to consider themselves a failure, yet they didn't. What can look like an awful failure in the present could lead to your biggest ever accomplishment. Van Gogh only sold one painting while he was alive. He died utterly convinced that he was a complete failure, oblivious to the fact that one day he would be regarded by many as the greatest artist of all time. This is not an excuse to not try. You have to try. After all, where would Van Gogh be if he didn't try? This is a framework for when you do try and you don't get the outcome that you want. You all have amazing potential. Do not let your fear of failure dictate who you are or what you do. Always try your best, but you should do things because you will fail. Love failing. Fail as hard and as often as you can. And when one strategy doesn't work, try something new. And when you feel shame, focus on these emotions. Ask yourself, why do I feel like this? What would I do differently next time? What lessons can I learn from this? Learn as much as you can from your mistakes and then let them go. And if you do this, you can never truly fail. Find comfort in the fact that mistakes can and will happen. But always remember the power of maybe.